How do we make meaning? Not all of us have the same ways of making meaning based on our own life experiences, culture, families, and a variety of factors which we will call personal circumstances. Of course, many people will share certain circumstances in part, but not their entirety. This is a common trope of what literature scholars would call the identity plot. You see, for a long time in the Anglo tradition of literature, there was a focus on the marriage plot, and you guys will recall things like Jane Austen and these types of books. The type of story where the character's arc depended on meeting the one and fleeing off into the distance, although it was usually not that simple. And not to say this plot is not still present in many stories, but now we're in a cultural turn where we focus on the identity plot. Some people even say this is harkening back to the hero's journey. In the identity plot, we can even make fun of the marriage plot, as I seem to have done here, but the basis of the identity plot is there is a person who is discovering who they are in relation to the circumstances they grew up in. But the twist in the identity plot is they examine this place of belonging only to find they don't totally fit in. They're deviant in some way. This is the arc of the identity plot. Just like in the marriage plot, there's always some foil where we're not sure whether the people will get together in the end. But in the identity plot, the main character finds out their identity is made up of many different parts, and this can be confusing. Recently, I was reading for a course I'm taking regarding composition theory, a little outside of my main field, but it's a research requirement, and I have taught composition classes for probably, the last decade, which doesn't seem like I'm old enough to say that. We were discussing culture, and though people are made up usually of many different cultures, given a deep search of their background, they will choose to identify with the culture which they feel most at home with. And in some cases, of course, the culture in which they would be identified with within the larger society. And even inside of that culture, they may not completely feel like an insider sometimes, but that culture does overall make them feel safe. It makes them feel loved. It makes them feel like they know about their past, they have a lineage. And this is also part of the identity plot. So let's return to the aspect we're discussing in this episode. Pallas, or Pallas Athena, rules our awareness of our problems, more specifically, our decision-making in relation to our deepest motivations. It also rules how we show ourselves through our decisions and how we cognitively connect subconscious patterns through our decisions. Pallas was the second asteroid found, and she represents wisdom, independence, talents, justice, and your relationship with your father and other masculine figures. Your Pallas sign tells you where your talents are strongest and how you interact with your father. It also says where you get your wisdom and inspiration, but on the negative side, Pallas influences injustice and conflict. As an example, as I usually do on this show, my Pallas is in Scorpio. This is funny because the most I've ever butted heads with, the people I've most butt heads with are usually Scorpio, or they have heavy Scorpio aspects. Not all the time though. I have a good friend who's a Scorpio and she has an Aquarius moon. I recently connected with an Aquarius who has a Scorpio rising. We get along pretty well because connection on the Aquarius level. But like the saying goes, you see yourself in other people, so conflicts can teach us what to heal or correct inside ourselves. Pallas is part of the main belt of asteroids situated between Mars and Jupiter and has a high inclination to be ecliptic. So if you think of the symbolism of that based on what you've learned about the planets Mars and Jupiter, Mars is the action planet, and Jupiter has to do with expansion, knowledge, learning, so Pallas is heavily influenced by these natures. This is Shilpa Ray with Add Value, Add Time.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3, go work, work, work. Da, da, da. MTIS, add value, add time. Don't remember the last time when I helped someone. Don't remember the last time I helped myself. I'm riding through tunnels with my horse blinders on. I've been standing clear of the closing doors like everyone else. Did you see that crazy man who wore a tree on his head, muttering obscenities under his breath? Hell, I'd be pissed off if they broke my shell and build a Whole Foods on top of it instead. Work, 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 da, da, da. MTIS, add value, add time, add value, add time, yeah. Either way, I work till I die, yeah. Work till I die. Become a better person when you get out of here. Hudson Valley Real Estate says it's so. Colonna in kaleidoscopes through mason jars. Artists in panic attacks in hybrid cars. Got all my visions of being 80 years old, climbing hunchback to the penthouse floor. It doesn't even faze me anymore. You broke my dreams and built a Whole Foods on top of it instead. Work, 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 da, da, da. MTIS, add value, add time, add value, add time. Till I die, yeah. Work till I die. Look at me now, stuck in this race since the day I met you, baby. Oh, look at me now. Oh, look at me now, losing face since the day I met you, baby. Oh, look at me now. Oh, look at me now, stuck in this race since the day I met you, baby. Look at me now. Oh, look at me now, losing face since the day I met you, baby. Oh, look at me now. Oh, look at me now. Oh, look at me now. Oh, look at me. Look at me now.
as I did my research for this episode, as I typically do, I came across this little organization called Ascension Research. And they had this compilation of these, what I guess I'll call divinely inspired speeches, or people who were practicing divination and they were inspired to speak on Pallas Athena. And it's kind of funny because I'm trying to figure out who these people are who are speaking. So for instance, this speech, which was recorded in Chelsea, Vermont in 1998, was by someone named Carolyn Louise Shearer, and they refer to her as the anointed representative, and then they have the little restricted, the copyright symbol, the R with the circle over it, and I'm thinking, okay, I don't totally understand why Carolyn Louise Shearer is copyrighted, but I'm going to go along with it. So I wanted to read Shearer's speech, and I also wanted to read a few others that I found on here in part, and I want to credit this to the Ascension Research Organization. And so it starts out like this. This is by Shearer in Chelsea, Vermont in 1998. Beloved ones, you have heard these words over and over through the kind offices of our beloved Godfrey and through the gracious assistance of our beloved Lotus. For years, truth is perfection. Nothing that was not conceived in the mind and heart of God has reality or immortality. Thank God. Then what happens when you feast with all the power and attention of your feeling world on the defects appearing within the life streams you encounter? You are not then embodying the consciousness of truth. It is not truth. Please feel that with all your heart and soul and spirit when you see any manifestation of ill health, imperfection, distress, and the countless number of limitations to which the human mind is heir. Your business is to see and be perfection. All of the law, dear people, is balance. There is no purpose in being like some of the blessed ascetics of the early ages who rushed from the initiations of worldly living into the cloisters to escape observing the idiosyncrasies of the rest of mankind. Mastery lies within the reach of the life stream who can observe imperfection and not allow rebellion, hate, resentment, and depression to churn within the feeling world, and who can, within the heart of that secret fire, which you are the guardians, firmly and powerfully assert, it is not true, calling for the manifestation of truth through that life stream. Do you think that for one fraction of a moment, hundreds and hundreds of God beings would have denied themselves the glory and freedom of nirvana and remained in the shadows of such creations that I would not describe to you if we tied our attention to the discrepancies manifest through our outer selves? You think you are sensitive, dear hearts, through your limited senses, through the small spectrum which your physical sight allows you to observe, and the very small octave in which your hearing perceives the sounds of the third-dimensional plane. But when you have the senses of complete freedom, and you can hear, as our beloved messenger said yesterday, the sounds of the inner bodies, and yet you can remain within that calm peace and demand God revealed through the life stream, then you become ourselves in action. How do you believe the Master Jesus was able to render the service which he requires of each of you to render? It was because he refused acceptance of the appearances. Judge not according to appearances, he said again and again and again. O precious ones, it is not just to give you a few hours away from the grind of your daily life, or a spiritual opiate to make the course of your life pilgrimage easier, that we come. There have been books written from the beginning of time, from the Upanishads and Vedas to your testaments, but it is to bring our feeling, our conviction, our love, and to endeavor to stir within you a desire to become that which you can manifest. We would not speak to you on something miraculous which you could not attain, any more than you would tell a child that he could accomplish something that was beyond his talents or capacities. Although, as an aside, I would say that we do this, but that would be cruelty. We never present an idea for manifestation which we have not carefully deliberated, and for which, with much contemplation and invocation, we, having looked over the life streams chosen for their potential ability to serve our cause. It is a beautiful sight when a being desires to bring forth new movement or cause, to see being present to vest it with the power to bring it forth, and then, in cooperation with certain ascended master sponsors, go through the 7 spheres and look at the glory of the casual bodies and ask for the assistance of certain ones who are prepared. So that was just a little excerpt from Beloved Pallas Athena, a speech by Carolyn Louise Shearer from 1998 in Chelsea, Vermont. Now I want to move to another speech, and this was through another divine messenger, but this was in 1953, a little while back, and it was in New York City, but this speech is also called Beloved Pallas Athena, and this person who was divining was named Geraldine Innocente, and this is the speech. It's fairly short. The respect mankind claim for the truth far exceeds the ability they have expressed to manifest it. The admittance of basic and simple ideas into the consciousness when they are based alone on obvious God truth is extremely vitalizing to the spirit of truth. The entertaining of thoughts of conflict and doubt is likewise debilitating to the individual holding such negative concepts. The fact that all truth is God connects to the realities of the spirit with the consciousness of man through illumination's flame. The fact that ideas are sometimes conflicting stems from the individual's own misinterpretations rather than the statements and laws proffered to mankind by the great cosmic being and ascended masters. Cosmic beings and ascended masters, pardon me. Enjoy the sunshine, love the elements, earth, air, water, and fire. Feel attuned with nature and keep harmonious with as much of life as possible. This is so much more important than merely embracing a dogma. Much of mankind's distress comes from the wish to feel important. Now, in an egocentric way, so many individuals do embrace a dogma in order that they may be considered the sponsors and dispensers of salvation to others, thus giving themselves a special importance in the universe. If feelings of pride were profitable to them personally or to us of the ascended host, we would not only condone but encourage it. However, when its dilatory effects create so much unhappiness, we can do no less than to decry it and advise the spiritual aspirant to hold humble feelings and simple God concepts of love and purity, especially at the beginning of the path, and always return to these simple concepts whenever the water appears too deep to safely escape should a sudden cramp of conflict arise. Truth exists to heal and is best acquired through absorption of the active principle in everyday affairs. This does not mean an abandoning of the search, but a postponement occasionally while the individual takes stock of talents and of self, analyzes situations, and plans for a brighter future, which is always more light. In this connection, I cannot emphasize enough the need for our chelas to call forth and hold the vision of intense cosmic light around their mind, world, and affairs. Nothing is so productive of truth as light. Finding God, one finds truth. Finding conflict, one can be easily detoured and not know it. The conscious cultivation of harmony, the sustaining of divine radiance, is never an accident. To understand truth, you must become truth through living it in the radiance of whatever measure of purity God has given you. Expanding it further by conscious effort, you will find at last a thinning of the veil, and eventually the peaceful valley will prove to be no mirage, for you will have entered the Shangri-La, or world of divine perfection, which the Father is. So I like these speeches. I'm sorry, that was not a very good transition, but I do like these speeches because they talk about all of the elements of Pallas Athena, which is basically an archetype that we use to discuss certain facets of our lives. And so what I hear thematically is conflict, paternal wisdom, guidance, and I hear not focusing on the imperfections of others and trying to have a higher mind about the situation and to try to figure out the conflicts in your own life. This is God is Gay with Violette.
Une nuit de cette taille et la lumière en te tend, tu devrais être honnête. Poursuivre une fille qui ouvre les portes de la ville toute violette. Je n'aime pas trop la musique et la colère. Quelquefois me prend pendant la fête. Oui, j'aime une fille d'une autre époque, un peu moins vile, en tout cas dans ma tête. Déchire ma harpe. Je suis tellement fière. Il faut percer le cœur. C'est là le sens de l'effort. C'est là que tu cherches et que tu mens. C'est la naissance du jour. Je tire une fois sans qu'on soit mort. C'est là le sens de l'effort. C'est là que tu cherches et que tu mens. C'est là que tu serres très fort. Je file la soie qui serre nos corps. C'est là le sens de l'effort. C'est l'importance de la mort. C'est tellement peu prononcé. C'est là le sens de l'effort. C'est là que tu cherches et que tu mens. C'est la naissance du jour.
There are quite a few variations on the mythological tale of Pallas Athena. Some say she was Triton's daughter. Others say she's an older god merged with Athena. But let's talk about what she represents. Pallas can be interpreted as our creative intellect and efforts. In astrology, Pallas can be an indicator of wisdom, intelligence, and healing. She's a tomboy, as we might have understood it, 20, 30 years ago. Tomboy was a very popular thing to say, not so much anymore. So we might say that she is androgynous and someone who harnesses a masculine energy, embodying the warrior archetype. And something to take note of, which I thought about within my own personal story, was that she was a daughter born when a boy was wanted. And in my own biography, that was something that happened with my father, is that he wanted a boy child, and I was not that. So he kind of projected whatever he thought about women onto his child instead of dealing with what he was presented with or trying to become more accepting or loving. It's been said that Pallas Athena had no mother because she was born from the head of her father, who was Zeus. And Zeus, is also Jupiter. In fact, she does have a mother in some tales who would be Metis, goddess of crafty thought and wisdom. Zeus had Metis as his first wife, but then he feared the prophecy that her first child, the bright-eyed maiden Athena, would be equal to her father in strength and wise understanding. And some would say that, in the case with my father and other people's fathers who don't want a daughter, they also come to fear that the daughter will see through some of their antics, or they will be wiser, or they will not, that there's some type of a competition there. And so Zeus swallowed, this is kind of gross, so Zeus swallowed his wife Metis after she'd conceived, but he got a big headache, and his friends had to chop him in the head with an axe, and from that wound jumped out Pallas Athena, fully grown and armed, screaming her battle cries. So she came out a warrior from Zeus's head. That's the myth. So Pallas is very tied to the father because her father gave birth to her. And so in some people's mind, this would signify a close bond between father and daughter. But some people, like Demetra George, I've mentioned her before on this show, she says that Pallas Athena represents the second developmental stage in people's lives when they look at their fathers to provide them with firmness and independence to leave the home and go forth in the world. So for me, that didn't really come from my father directly. That would come from different influences I had in my family, including my mother. So I would say, you would have to relate it to just paternal influence, whatever paternal influence or love you receive that allows you to go out into the world and have an influence and kind of travel about the world. That's where you're going to feel that father-daughter bond that they're talking about in a broad sense, right? They're talking about it broadly, but you have to look at your own life and see where you receive that influence. So in the astrology chart, we see also a beautiful and loving personality within the asteroid Pallas's astrology chart. And maybe that's something that I won't get into too much on this show, but every asteroid that is birthed into the world, right, or exists, when it's discovered, astrologers mark the date, and then they create an astrology chart based on the date that they were discovered in the sky, formally by an astrologer. So this can be a little problematic, right? Because what if somebody discovered them prior to that? What if somebody discovered the asteroid prior to that? Well, the thought is that once it's made public, it becomes the kind of de facto birth date, and people may agree or disagree with this. However, I would look at it as Pallas is very influenced by Mars and Jupiter, so we can say that she has an influential bent on that spectrum, right, with Mars and Jupiter influences. This is Tendon Levey with To Bear What You Are.
You're still looking for it. Oh, I saw you in the streets, and I knew you were it. Sitting with my color, your girl's as good as thing right. And when I look at you, I see you, just you. You swear holding it close. I will buy its years apart, girl, to bear you what you want.
Some say that Pallas gives authority in a sober mind, sometimes making its natives judges or arbitrators, but it also exposes people to cruel and severe traits. So how I would interpret this is, like I mentioned in our Sarah's cast, depending on where Pallas is placed and how it's aspected, depends on whether or not you're aware of any cruel or severe traits you have, how you judge others and situations, and how much you embrace your authority. Because Pallas is the mind of God, and that means that Pallas is where you're gifted with powerful perception. And in the chart, she's going to show you where you're able to figure things out, where you strategize, where you have the ability to use logic and reasoning, and where you're given a spark of creative understanding. It's going to show you how you recognize patterns, and I would suggest too that there are going to be patterns of human experience and behavior that you will notice based on your own experience or based on what you've studied or how you notice things, the natural way that you communicate with someone else. And by natural, I mean your own natural way. It's going to be different for everyone. And I would say Pallas also helps you to understand the complexity of language. So earlier in the podcast, I mentioned my study of composition theory. And composition theory shows us how complex the system really is and how meaning making is actually the way that people learn a language the best, not through grammar and instruction and little pedantic things that people think English teachers do, but actually through the making of meaning is how people figure out languages. That's why they say being immersed in the language can help a lot, because you're constantly having to negotiate with other people about how to make what you're saying mean something. Pallas would also represent how you know what to say in order to get the desired action that will benefit the whole. Objectivity and, using that as a strength when we need to tap into our own objectivity. She's considered that space between thought and action. And this also relates to impartiality. And when you're impartial, you can overcome emotional and psychological blocks. So Pallas is conscious of her decisions and the impact that they will make. And in the chart, she is our creative intelligence, and where we can gain clarity on situations. And let's go back for a moment to the idea of a heroic conflict. So in the identity plot, the person finding their identity is not necessarily seen as they're not Beowulf, right? They're not the hero that, goes through all this and we see them age and we see them defeat. But at the same time, I feel like there is a huge parallel, because when we're finding our own identity, the way that we interact with the world really depends on what we think of our own identity and how we relate to other people. And Pallas may also indicate where we will be involved in heroic conflicts, whether or not we understand them as heroic, but she indicates where we have political acumen or a strong political opinion. And Pallas doesn't sit on the fence about things. I've heard astrologers describe it like that, but looks at all sides and then makes a judgment. This is W.D. Amaradeva with Paawena nil Walawe.
සිතක පැතුම් වැලන ඈත පාවෙලා සිහින නිම්නයේ සැරිසනා Apsaraviye Paawena Walawe Nadi Talave Ridi Jalase Ege Sinave Kalum Sangaunado Paawena Nimi Walawe
Some call Pallas the goddess of self-defense. She won't go seeking you out to antagonize, but believe that she can defend herself. And she can defend the people that she loves. Anytime that we deal with why we want to live our lives, or how we make meaning, or why we want to live our lives a certain way, I should clarify, Pallas is what we're dealing with. And the way we decide to live our lives should be through wisdom. So listeners, how do you make meaning?